Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you all for joining today, but special thanks of course to Beth who has kindly given up her time to be here with us this afternoon. Beth Maundrill is the editor of Infosecurity magazine and has been, I think it would probably be fair to say, in the thick of things ahead of the Infosecurity Europe 2023 at the Excel, which is of course why we're all here. My name is Ed Cooper. I'm a senior campaign director at Babel, a specialist B2B PR agency based in London. Today, we'll be discussing the show over the next 30-40 minutes, but for all of those in attendance, please do post any questions in the chat throughout and we'll do our best to get to them towards the end. So let's get into it. So firstly, Beth, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. As you said, in the thick of it with prep for Infosecurity Europe, that we are only 2 weeks away now. So there's a lot of planning and preparation going on my side.
And how are those preparations going? Is it getting squeaky bum time, or are you cruising into it?
Not quite yet. There's still a lot of things that are still to be confirmed, but I'm not worried. I've got a lot of spreadsheets open, but we have got a full team attending this year. So for me, this is the first time I'm attending Infosecurity Europe. And also heading up the team in terms of the editorial capacity as well. So a lot on my plate, but I'm really excited to be doing so. I thought what I could do actually is start by kind of telling you a little bit about the team presence and what we'll be doing at the show. Yeah. So of course, I'll be there managing what everyone's doing. And then I'll also be joined by my two staff members, James Coker, who some of the people in the audience might have spoken to in the past. He's been with Infosecurity for just over 3 years now. So he's been to the show, obviously not during COVID, but last year as well. And also I'll be joined by our news reporter, Kevin Poirot. So those guys will then be supported by 2 freelance contributors who are going to be covering the keynote stage and some of the other stages at the event. So they'll really be like sitting in those conference sessions, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later, and writing on those. In terms of what James and Kevin are doing, James is kind of deputizing me, but he's doing a lot of moderating sessions, hosting stuff, and he'll be doing a lot of video interviews as well. Kevin is going to be more like our roving reporter, so he's going to be the one that's doing the real news gathering at the show, speaking to the exhibitors, hopefully speaking to some of the speakers as well. I mentioned there we're doing video interviews. So Infosecurity magazine does have its own stand. We work with Bright Talk to film a number of video interviews throughout the week. My Tuesday is full already. I've already got my interviews lined up for that. They are, for the majority part, they are paid for opportunities, but we do have some editorial space as well to have some cybersecurity speakers that are not necessarily affiliated with vendors and are not kind of paying for the opportunity. And I guess finally, the 2 events that the magazine is hosting, I'm hosting the Women in Cybersecurity event, which is an absolute pleasure. And I've started having the touch calls with my speakers already, and they are just absolutely wonderful members of the community, and I'm really looking forward to that. And then on the final day, James is hosting an executive breakfast event, which is going to explore how to secure multi-cloud environments. So it's like a specific networking opportunity for security leaders to kind of join, listen to a panel discussion, and have breakfast as well. So that's what we're doing. I thought it'd be quite useful for your audience to kind of understand what we're all up to during the week, and why, if I don't reply to your email, I'm really sorry.
Absolutely. You know, it sounds like there's a hell of a lot going on, so no one can blame you for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Brilliant. So I guess you've already mentioned it a moment ago, but you sort of touched on the agenda. So can you tell us a little bit about what you have in store for exhibitors and attendees this year? You know, what are the key themes going to be?
Yeah, so I mean, the keynote stage is really the heart of the conference program, and I think what's really great about it and how the team put it together is it is a end user led discussions. So you won't really see the vendor presentations there. Those are more on the insight stage and the discovery zone, those other stages that are on the show floor. So it's a real unique opportunity for attendees and exhibitors to hear from people that are actually in the thick of these cybersecurity programs and companies, like big organizations, how they're positioning their cybersecurity. One thing I'm really excited about, though, as we mentioned, is our opening keynote, which is Michael Johnson. So I know some people might be thinking, well, what's a sports person doing opening a cybersecurity show? But I think based on the conversation I had with him just yesterday, I think a lot of his experience is going to resonate with those senior leadership teams in terms of the CISOs and those higher ups, in terms of how they make decisions, how they prepare for the unknown. I think one thing he mentioned was a lot of it is not knowing what's coming, what the next challenge is going to be. And I think that will really resonate with the cybersecurity community. I think it will be, I know, as I said, the attendance to Infosecurity Europe is completely free, but I think it will be a sellout event. So you want to kind of get in the queue early to be able to join that one and get a good seat. Other keynotes are Matthew Said. Probably a lot of UK-based people will know who he is. He'll be doing that kind of out-of-the-box thinking. And then on the final day, there's Karen Al-Azari, and she's a friendly hacker. She's actually done one of those YouTube videos, you know, when they get an expert to review different films and say how true it is to like the field that they're in, like crash investigations or like espionage and stuff like that. She's actually done one of those looking at hacking. So she's a really good speaker as well. I think she's done a couple of TED Talks also. In terms of the sessions, I've picked out a couple, and I'm just going to focus on the keynote stage, because across the event there's over 200 sessions that you can join, from the startup showcase, the tech talks, everything. So it's worth taking a look at those, but I knew we only had about 30-40 minutes, so I didn't want to dive into everything. But a couple I've picked out. On day one, there's a interactive session with two representatives from PwC. They'll be looking at how to navigate a cyber crisis. So I think that practical knowledge and those practical kind of presentations are really great. And on the final day, at just before 2 o'clock, a representative from the Nationwide Building Society is going to be presenting a case study on attack surface operations, and how they approach their management of their attack surface, which I think, again, that will be a really good one for people to listen and learn from. I've got a list of others, but I'll stop there. Hopefully that's given everyone a bit of a taste for what's coming up. But I mean, other speakers on the keynote stage include the CISO from EasyJet, Penguin Random House, Director of Information Security is going to be there. Just a real great lineup of really senior leaders that are going to be able to share their knowledge and expertise.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a hell of a lot of insight on offer for attendees, and yeah, I'm certainly thrilled to listen into some of that myself while I'm there. So I guess from a PR standpoint, then, how can security companies best engage with you and your team, you know, what in a run-up to, but also, of course, during the show, when, as you already mentioned, you'll be very busy on the floor itself?
Yeah, so obviously I know this is the heart of the conversation, and it's so tricky. There's over 300 exhibitors at this year's event, and I mean, the cybersecurity industry in general is really saturated. There are so many new companies coming. I mean, my inbox is absolutely full, to be honest with you. I would say one thing we're doing, and this is what my team is doing, this is not necessarily for every journalist, but we are trying to prioritize those that are exhibiting. That's purely because if we're going to be covering Infosecurity Europe, we want to be covering those that are there and have something to say during the event. That doesn't mean to say if a company isn't exhibiting, we won't set up a meeting or something, but unfortunately we do have to decide how to prioritize these things. I mean, I've covered trade shows for over a decade now. I used to cover defense and aerospace, so I would go to about probably 12 to 15 trade shows a year, and that's always the approach I would have taken with those events as well. So it's not specific to Infosecurity Europe. I think in terms of how to get noticed, I mean, we're talking 2 weeks before the event, so ideally I would have probably heard from you guys before. But what we're looking for is something interesting that's being announced, a new report that's being launched. I know a lot of companies will hold back report launches for the event. So if we can get a look at that before we go to the show as well, that's amazing. Anything I can write in the next 2 weeks before I'm actually at the show is also a bonus, because we can hold it under embargo. That's absolutely fine. But if you can get us, I know your clients probably want to sit down with a journalist during the event, but we just don't, as I said at the beginning, all the stuff I'm doing, I probably won't have time for more than 2 or 3 sit down meetings. So anything we can have before is absolutely like really great for us. So yeah, new reports, new product announcements. So traditionally Infosecurity magazine, sorry, hasn't necessarily covered a huge amount of product announcements, but it's something I'm trying out to see how our audience engages in those. Because I think it was probably a few, maybe 5-6 years ago, I think the publishing side was overwhelmed with like product announcements, and then you have to kind of sift through what is actually new. I mean, even when I was covering defense, sometimes you get a product announcement, you look into it and say, well, it's not actually new, you're just renaming something you're already doing or something. So do make sure it's new, because we will be able to pick out, and that's something you guys have to challenge your clients with, because I know they're keen to get in front of us, and sometimes that's a conversation you kind of have to have. I think an absolute bonus as well is if your client, or if you're in-house, if your company has a customer that's willing to talk to us as well about their experience with your product, their experience with, say they are using an MDR tool. What made them choose to do so? What are the benefits? Because that's some kind of, if you look back at what I highlighted in the keynote stage, those case studies, that real life learning, that's what our readers want. They want to see, okay, so this has been implemented by X company, and these are the challenges they had, this is how it tried to solve them. So if you have a customer, I know that's super challenging because it has to go through a number of levels of approval, but just to let you know, it is a bonus. I don't want to be too negative in this discussion either, so I will really just quickly run through things to avoid. General talk, our CEO is here, he can talk about anything. I don't have time to think about like exactly what it is, so try and tie it in with like the report you're releasing, the new product you have, or the customer. That's amazing. We don't cover anything that's outside of cybersecurity or data security or information security. So if it falls outside those realms, we probably won't touch it. That's probably not going to happen during the week of Infosecurity Europe, but kind of worth reinforcing. And I would say I struggle sometimes when I'm presented with like the chief marketing officer as a person of availability, because they're not necessarily who our audience wants to hear from. So anyone that's like outside of the specialism of cybersecurity sometimes isn't the best person to be presented with. Also, I know, as I said, my inbox is quite full. If I haven't replied to a third chaser, I don't have time. I'm really sorry, but I think sometimes we get those like third, fourth chasers, and it's like I can't do it all. So we'll hopefully pick it up next time, but hopefully that's kind of useful in terms of like a few tips and what we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, really great advice, and I think that's certainly a lot of the listeners can take away from that, and hopefully you know, approach you in a way that's going to work out mutually for everyone. I can only imagine the state of your inbox in the run up to this kind of thing. So
yeah, well, I've actually closed my inbox, so my video and everything is working, and I might have to go outside and take a deep breath before I open it again after this.
Oh dear. Yeah, thank you for that. That was really, really insightful. Yeah, obviously, you spoke about the opportunities in the run up to and during the show itself. But I guess in terms of after the show, what does Infosecurity have planned? For covering the things that happened at the show once the dust has settled.
Yeah, so I mean, Infosecurity Magazine is a 365 day a year platform where we publish news pretty much every day. I think I even have scheduled news for Christmas Day because we're global, so not everyone is taking the day off on Christmas and celebrating. So don't be disheartened if we haven't managed to get through to you. I would say, like, maybe in a couple of weeks after the show, follow up. If the news is still relevant and you'd still like to have a conversation with us about it, I'm more than happy to consider it after the show, because it can just be general news that we're covering. As part of our team, we have two contributors that do daily news for us. So I'm happy to assign stuff to those guys, or James and Kevin often do deep dives into different elements of what's going on in the cybersecurity world. So it might be relevant for something they're doing. So don't be disheartened that we haven't got back to you during this really busy period. We've got the rest of the year, we really do. So feel free to send like a gentle follow-up a couple of weeks after, like, oh, sorry, we missed you, but like, is it still relevant? We'd still love to talk to you about it. Or this has happened since the show. So do keep in touch with us. And I'd also say use it as an opportunity to build that relationship with us as well. Just because we haven't been able to get to you guys this year doesn't mean we won't next year. And if you're in touch with us already and we know who you are and what you're about, like I get so many press releases through and so many like requests. I don't know what all these companies do. Like I try and keep on top of it, but as I said, there's over 300 companies exhibiting at Infosecurity Europe. So even if it's like, I'm sorry we couldn't like touch base during Infosec Europe, this is what this company does. Like really spell it out to us. The easier it is for us to digest the information, the better. So explain, and I know your colleague did this for me, who your clients are, what their key things that they can talk about, who their key people are that you can offer us, because we might be right. I mean, for example, everyone's probably seen the news over the last couple of days with the Move It hack. So if I know there's someone that's real expert in zero-day exploits at the company that you represent, it might mean I can get in touch with you rather than you having to chase me. So just provide us with all that information after the event as well. I think there's no harm in doing so. Explain who your clients are. A 10-minute conversation as well, rather than just emails, is absolutely fine. We will try and get round to it. So that's kind of how you can approach us after the event. I think that's something to bear in mind and something to communicate to your clients as well, because I don't want, I'm sure they probably are chasing you, like, why haven't we got a slot with Infosec magazine? But hopefully you can play them this and say, this is what we're up against.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that the sheer volume of cybersecurity companies that are in operation these days, I can imagine that'd be very useful to have a more broken down of what everyone would speak about, and so more great advice. If I could just go back to something you already touched on a little bit, you mentioned around news that you're open to product announcements now, and also new research. Is there anything you can kind of touch? Anything you can really go into about advice that you can give to security companies who are putting news out around the show? I mean, how best to cut through the noise? Obviously, beyond the it being fresh, it being new, it actually being a new product as opposed to a new updated product or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult. As I said, like there's so many companies. I think it's making it unique. I mean, I don't know how to do that exactly, but I think just ensuring what you're sharing is really new and it is interesting and it solves a problem. Our audience is cybersecurity practitioners at various different levels, so from the more technical side to those senior leaders and the CISO suite. So pick who you think you're talking to, because that's probably part of our audience, and then curate it for them. I think that would be something that's quite useful to bear in mind. I think it's trying to show that what you're doing really does solve a real life problem. And I think a lot of companies do fall into the trap of using a lot of marketing speak and kind of making news out of something that isn't really news. So just try and be like hyper focused on what it is you're trying to get across.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So we were talking a little bit before the attendees joined the line about how soon you guys at Infosecurity and the events team actually kick off prep for the event, and you were saying that it's more or less straight away. It's a 365-day a year endeavor. So if we look ahead then to next year, when should companies start planning for the show, and what advice do you have for companies who are applying for speaker opportunities and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, rebooking opens already. So for exhibitors that want to be part of the show next year, they have that opportunity to do so now. So that's why I mean it's a 365-day cycle. It started already, really. I think in terms of the speaking, I know so I kind of work alongside the events team, but I don't know exactly their deadlines and stuff. But I think a call for papers and presentations does open like around like before Christmas. I think as well that it's tricky. We do have a lot of submissions for, I think it sits in the strategy talks. Well, that's where those kind of call for papers go, and there's just so many. So again, try and make it new, fresh, something that maybe hasn't been bandied about a lot. I think in the cybersecurity world we do hear the same things over and over. So if your client has something really new and innovative to talk about, or a new angle on something as well, I think that's really important. And in terms of working with us, I think I kind of covered it. It's having that relationship with us already. If I know who you are and what you're about, it's easier then when we come to the show next year, a month before, I can say, right, I remember those guys, or when you email me, I recognize who you are. I think that's really important. So do continue to, for the magazine, to build those relationships with us 365. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I guess more generally, what are the big cybersecurity topics and the trends that you're looking at Infosecurity at the moment? Are there any that really stand out?
Yeah, I mean, if you had asked me this time last year, I would have said the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the fallout from that was the biggest talking point. That stuff it's continuing, but it has quietened down a little bit. But I think everyone probably on the call knows I'm going to say AI. So every conference I've been to before this, there's been a lot of talk about AI, and I think one of the things is people just don't know. There's a lot of unknown around it still. So companies are grappling with how to use it, what policies they should have for people that are using it. I think more so like the generative AI, like ChatGPT, Google's Bard, all of those ones, and how it's being used already by threat actors. That's a huge discussion point. And I think what would be interesting is to see a company talking about how to secure the use of a generative third-party AI tool, and how your company can use it safely and securely within the policies that it already has. How do you govern the use of a tool like that? I mean, the possibilities are kind of endless, but I think a lot of the practitioners I've heard from, they're like, there's still a lot to come. So I think a lot of the conversations are going to be around that at Infosecurity Europe. And I think, I mean, based on this week's fallout from the Move It hack, I think that'll be something that's really discussed over the next couple of weeks, especially because it's involving some really big brands like BBC, Aer Lingus, European brands that everyone's familiar with. So I think a lot of people are going to be talking about that. I mean, it's the perfect storm, really. 0 day, big brand, supply chain, software. So it's got all the things that you'll hear about on the keynote stage. Definitely one that's going to be talked about a lot.
Yeah, it does really feel like this. The supply chain security situation is just so relentless, and almost as soon as everyone gets over one, it seems like another big incident happens. And I certainly agree. The AI situation is going to be absolutely fascinating, and it's really interesting to see how people from all of our clients and everywhere across multiple industries are just kind of scrambling at the moment to try and work out their position on it and how it's actually going to impact on their.
I would say though, for you guys writing press releases and us writing articles, I don't think it's going to replace us just yet. I think it's a tool to use, but I really don't think those like chatbots are there to like kind of do what we do, so everyone can kind of sleep easy. We're not going to be taken over by AI just yet, but I think it's really important to start in the journalism world and the PR world using it as a tool. How can we integrate this into our workflows already? I mean, I'm playing around with different ways to use it. I think the biggest problem with it in terms of journalism though is like it's not accurate enough and there's no sources, and also like we love the quotes from like your guys cybersecurity experts because it's unique, original, it's what someone with a lot of experience has. So yeah, just on that note.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear, and I think it certainly had a few of us here scratching our heads when it first appeared. But yeah, as you say, you can't really be a human when it comes to insight and expertise in that way. So yeah. So you kind of touched on this already, but I guess just outside of the show, what advice can you give to companies looking to secure coverage in Infosecurity magazine beyond kind of getting to know you guys on a personal basis? Is there kind of themes that you follow throughout the year or anything like that you can touch on?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of themes, think about all that. I'm sure you guys have it all planned in your calendars already, but we'll do stuff around Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We'll do stuff around International Women's Day. We'll do stuff around change your password day. I think that was like the 4th of May. So there's those kind of milestones within the calendar that we'll do anyway. We also have our online summit coming up in the first week of October. We're going to be shaking things up a little bit in terms of the format of that, so that's quite exciting. There's a number of sponsorship packages for that that probably are worth exploring if you're if the clients that you represent want to kind of enhance their coverage as well as that kind of lead generation that a lot of people are looking for. But yeah, I think it's the relationship building is like the key thing. Whether that is just a phone call, a quick coffee, yeah, just making sure that we know who you are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're finally in a situation where we can actually get face to face again, and so it's important that we have those touch points. So just before we move on to the Q&A, then I wanted to just touch on a couple more Infosecurity magazine specific things. So I know that you guys are very active with your own webinar series, and you've also got a monthly podcast. So I just wondered if you could give the audience a bit of insight into what you have coming up in that regard, and how experts can actually get involved in both the webinar and also the podcast.
Yeah, so the webinars, we have the capacity to do 2 a week. I think we've got about 3 or 4 coming up over the next couple of weeks. Obviously, we don't schedule any for Infosecurity Europe. That would be insanity. In terms of the people we have on those webinars, we do reserve a spot for the sponsor, and they ought to be the only vendor representative. But if you have someone that's like part of a consultancy, or again a customer that's willing to speak on your behalf or something like that, that's probably something that we can facilitate in terms of having those guys speak on those on those webinars. But we have had recently, one of the webinars was about a report that someone was releasing, and they actually wanted other vendors to join. So that's kind of how those work. It kind of is based on, we try and go for vendor neutral panel guests, typically, unless we're kind of advised otherwise. In terms of the podcast, at the moment we do it once a month. The themes are all scheduled in. I don't know what they are off by heart, actually. I've got a list somewhere. And we try and we tend to talk to threat intelligence analysts and stuff like that on the podcast, because they are really the people that are observing what's going on in terms of those threats and how to respond to them. I think we had a good one last month with Checkpoint Research talking about their observations around ChatGPT specifically. So those kind of things, like when you've got a report that you can discuss and talk about, that's really valuable to us, because you can pick into some of the information, highlight it, and it goes with the discussion that we're having. I might try and look at exploring how regular we do those in the future. We might try and bump it up a little bit. We'll have to see what that appetite is, and I'll be reviewing kind of what we've done over the last 6 months as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I can imagine that a lot of our listeners would be really keen to be involved in those, and it's interesting to see that podcasts are really becoming that new medium. Really, it seems to be getting a lot of traction, and yeah, it's a really interesting format. So we now have a few questions from the attendees. So we'll just pick a few out, and but please, anyone in the audience who would like to ask Beth a question, now's the time to share in the chat, and we'll get around to them if we can. So we've got one here about the women in tech in the cyberspace. So women in tech and women in tech and cybersecurity is obviously becoming a really important topic. And I saw you host a Women in Cybersecurity networking event at the show. Are you also interested in this from an editorial standpoint, and what's your take on the gender balance within the cybersecurity industry?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one. So we do cover, I call them like human factor issues. So whether that's gender diversity, neurodiversity, skills, how to like bridge the skills gap, I feel like it all fits into that. And that is something that my predecessor covered a lot, and I've really taken on board and continued with, because it is something that people talk about a lot and they want to hear from others. I mean, that's why the Women in Cybersecurity event is turning out to be so popular, because it is something that's really still part of the discussion. I mean, I've always worked in very male dominated environments. As I kind of mentioned, I worked in the defense space for the best part of a decade. And what I would say about in the cybersecurity community is it is such an active conversation, but there's still a lot to be done. And I think that just goes beyond cyber. I think it is just because it is such a traditionally male field. It just comes up with the same challenges that, I mean, I would have seen in defense. Obviously, defense is a little bit more unique because you're getting people from the military into the industry, and that's skewed anyway. What I would say in terms of the people I've spoken to, though, especially for the Women in Cyber event, is the need for positive conversations that have outcomes and actually actionable advice. So rather than just talking about the challenges, like, I think as a woman, I know it's difficult. I know it's easy to get shot down. I know it's sometimes you feel like a complete imposter. I mean, I think I did a LinkedIn post yesterday about how I kind of felt in my journey as a female journalist in these fields, and like often I'm the only person at the press briefing table that is a woman. And I mean, I've had some odd comments from my male counterparts. They didn't necessarily work with my company, but other journalists. So those kind of things, those challenges, they've always been there. But I think it's really about sharing, mentorship, the positive elements of the effort, rather than just talking about the challenges now. And I think a lot of the senior leaders in cybersecurity are also more than happy to part their knowledge. I think having if there's a female cybersecurity leader in the company you represent, just manage that. If you want to put them as the like a voice of women in cyber, just manage that quite carefully, because I think a lot of people do roll their eyes about the, oh, is it difficult? Yeah, it's been difficult. Like, we get it. Like, try and turn it into more positive, and I think that's what a lot of people are doing now.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's obviously a really important issue, so great to get your take on that. So another question we have here is about the physical magazine, in terms of how far you plan in advance. Obviously, it's a quarterly magazine, so when do you need to be pitching to be featured each quarter?
Yeah, so that usually starts around 3. So one, I'm putting the one that's just been done to bed. We'll start commissioning the next one. We've got a forward features link on our website. It's right at the bottom. I haven't updated it yet for the Q3 edition, but that'll come shortly. So you can always check that out. And also, if it doesn't get featured in the magazine, it can always go into one of the online news dives that we do. As I said, James and Kevin do those deeper dives into specific topics, and I want to be doing more of those. Kevin did a really good threat intelligence 3-part series earlier in the year, so those are the kind of things I'm going to be looking at continuing into the latter half of the year.
Brilliant. And in terms of the types of stories that you get on the website, which typically tend to perform better in terms of engagement and clicks? Is it news, contributed articles? What tends to perform well?
Yeah, so I mean, there is a most read box a bit lower down on the website, so you can always take a look at that. A lot of it is to do with like the ransomware threats and attacks, and anything that is like quite pertinent to what's going on today. So if you can comment on something like that, that's really useful. As I said, I am exploring the looking at covering more of the product announcements, so I'll be monitoring how well those perform, but at the moment it is, and a lot of the more technical stories get quite a lot of clicks as well. Alessandro, one of our freelance contributors, he's quite good at turning those around, and it's surprising how much his content gets those views actually. So yeah, a lot of the more technical stuff will really get picked up, and as long as it's on point in terms of like the news that's going on at the moment, that'll always perform quite well for us. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then a couple about how you like to work personally. So, how do you prefer to be pitched? I imagine that you, of course, might be cautious about giving away the secret, given
Yeah.
your inbox is already very full. But are there certain types?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying. I think what I would say is like patience is key. My pet peeve is those like persistent follow-ups, and I don't really know how you guys can get around that, because I understand you guys have your own ways of working, but I think I think I wrote it in a blog someone recently asked me to do. Like, an introduction before a pitch is really great. As I was saying, like, I want to understand what this company does, why they're talking about what they're talking about now, who you are, like, and also one thing we've been getting a lot recently is the mass emails from PRs, which I completely understand you guys do. You have your list of journalists. One of my flatmates a few years ago, he's a press officer for a big company, so I kind of know, I do know how it works, but I've been getting a lot like, hi Beth, will you be at Infosecurity? I'm like, yes, I will. So that kind of is grating on me a little bit at the moment, because I understand you have to send those mass emails, but even if you just pop me just like a 1-line email, like, hey, I'm going to send you a press release, hope it's of interest, like, you haven't met me before. I think it's just like about navigating that relationship. But I understand it's difficult for you guys, and you've got your way of working and your demands as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that personal touch is something, I've seen it mentioned a few times on LinkedIn and that kind of thing. So it doesn't take too long to come up with, a more personal way of working. So yeah, that's great advice.
I think the question as well says certain times. I'll give something away. If you catch me on a Friday afternoon, I will probably pick up the phone. Can't guarantee it, but a Monday morning, it's going to be tricky. Later in the week, I'm gonna have a little bit more time, just in terms of how I work as well. So for the people that have attended, they can take that one away with them. Yeah, Fridays are usually a little bit quieter. I have a little bit more time to breathe. I can go through those emails that I haven't been able to get around to just yet. So yeah, that's probably a little bit of a secret I can share.
Well, thank you for that. That's good to know. So I think we've probably got time for one more question. I think you mentioned the Move It hack earlier, and I imagine that you've been receiving a lot of industry comments around that issue and around similar issues previously. So what is it? What can you do to make a comment stand out so that you'll use it in your articles?
Yeah, don't make it obvious that your client is trying to promote their product. Oh, this happened, and if they had only had this product or this thing that we happen to do, it would have all been fine, because it probably wouldn't have been fine, to be honest with you. So those we do stay away from. It doesn't happen like often, but sometimes I do read a comment and I do roll my eyes a little bit. Also with these kind of stories as well, I think it's quite good for the audience to know that we'll do the initial news, which we've done. That's taken care of. Alessandro did a piece yesterday covering the bug itself. So again, going into the more technical side of why the vulnerability existed, what it means. And then Phil Muncaster this morning, he's done a piece on how the fallout, more about the fallout, the brands that have been targeted. So we've already done 2 stories on it. I can see and identify that it's going to be a big story that's going to linger for quite a long time. There's probably a lot more legs on it as well. So what we'll probably do in the next few weeks is we will do like a deeper dive on it. So if you have a look at what we did on the Royal Mail story, we do the initial news and then we do like a deeper dive where maybe we'll have a couple of interviews with people that have got like a specialism in 0-day exploits or third party stuff like that. So just because we haven't covered it right now doesn't mean we won't. So if your guys and your clients have something that they think they could really get their teeth stuck into with it, rather than just the quick comment, that's really useful for us to know. Don't necessarily send us the comments they have, but say like, hey, so and so could really get into this. He's got experience, he or she has experience in this, and this. Like, let's start that conversation, because stuff like this, it will be the talk of the town for quite a while. And I think if you take a look again, like I said, at what we did with the Royal Mail story, those deeper dives are kind of what people want to read about as well, especially from a platform like ours, which is uniquely cybersecurity focused. Obviously you can see what the BBC is doing is very different from what we'll be doing. So definitely with that story in particular and stories similar, so as I said, like Royal Mail, Log4j, anything like that, that is, to me, I identify it as quite big. That's the approach we'll take. So definitely worth thinking about who you've got on hand that could have a quick chat with us and really explain it as well, because we're covering it, but we are not like the experts in every single thing. You guys have the experts to hand, so we are more than willing to listen to them and use their expertise to help us educate our audience.
Fantastic. So I know we said like one more, but I've just got one final question for you very quickly. Is that you've already mentioned AI being something you're really interested in at the moment, and also, of course, the software supply chain issues that are happening at the moment. Are there any other big topics that you're keen to hear about?
So personally, from my side, one thing when I started at Infosecurity Europe, Infosecurity magazine, when I started there, I was asking people what they think are kind of not necessarily gaps in our coverage, but stuff that we don't cover as much as we should. And one thing that I'm trying to work on, and it's a bit of a minefield, so it's quite difficult, is the legislation, regulation, governance, that kind of stuff. It's what the senior leadership cybersecurity professionals need to know about. And obviously in the UK, especially, we're in quite a unique position that we have to follow European laws, but also in the UK, we're trying to develop our own. So there's a lot of bits of legislation going through Parliament, a lot of AI legislation actually as well, which Kevin covered recently, and a lot of our audience is North America as well. So we do try and tap into what's going on across the pond as much as we can. So if you have a company where they're following closely and reacting to legislation that's being passed in Europe, the UK, North America, including Canada, or Singapore as well, let us know, because that's something that we're trying to get better at covering ourselves. And I think it's something that a lot of people are talking about as well.
Absolutely. I can certainly suggest a few names from our client roster, so I'll be getting in touch after this. Wonderful. Well, I think that we're almost at time, so we'll leave it there. But Beth, thank you so much once again for your time and your invaluable insights. Really appreciate you speaking with me this afternoon. And to everyone in attendance, thank you for joining. We'll follow up with a recording. And if you're interested in having a conversation about PR and comms, please just get in touch. So yeah, thank you so much again, Beth, and I'll see you at the show.
Thank you. I hope it was useful. And yeah, I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.